This is the FM Gold channel of All India Radio. In the program News Analysis, now we bring a discussion on political developments in Sri Lanka. The participants are Skand Ranjan Tayal, former diplomat, and Nilova Roy Chaudhary, journalist.
A constitutional crisis has been precipitated in Sri Lanka by the sudden removal of Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe and replacing him with former President Mahinda Rajapaksa, and more recently last night by the President dissolving the Parliament and seeking fresh elections in January 2019. Ambassador Skand Tayal, what exactly do you think that this means, A, for Sri Lankan democracy itself? Is this a constitutional coup that has taken place, or can President Sirisena not really justify this particular action? And B, we can maybe talk about a little later about India-Sri Lanka relations as a whole, what this particular constitutional crisis means for the region.
The 26th October sacking of the Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe by President Maithripala Sirisena took the Sri Lankans by surprise and the entire world by surprise. And as far as the constitutional provisions are concerned, where it is, certainly it is a presidential system of government, and President has the powers to prorogue and summon and dissolve Parliament, etc. But there was a 19th Constitution Amendment in April 2015 when some checks were put on these unfettered powers. And the dissolution of Parliament can only be after 4.5 years at least of a 5-year term, or if the 2/3 members of the Parliament ask for a dissolution. That has certainly not been the case. So the dissolution which was announced yesterday, dissolution of Parliament, seems to be unconstitutional. And also the dismissal of the Prime Minister, because the Prime Minister is on the basis of his majority in the Parliament. So only when he or she loses his or her majority in Parliament, only then the question of dismissal would arise. And I understand that certainly UNP, United Nations Party, which is Prime Minister Wickremesinghe's party, they have decided to approach the Supreme Court because it is certainly a breach of the Constitution. So perhaps the Sri Lankan polity has come into some kind of a uncertainty for the time being.
It's very strange somehow that, on the one side, India has extremely cordial relations with Sri Lanka, particularly since the arrival of President Maithripala Sirisena in 2015. And the fact that Sri Lanka appeared to be sort of doing quite well and bilateral relations were going very well, and the other island state or the atoll state in the region, the Maldives, after a couple of years of tense relations, has probably come back to an even keel after the defeat of President Abdullah Yameen in the Maldives. It's very strange somehow that the presence of the unknown or the unseen Chinese hand appears to be constantly creating some sorts of problems in the South Asian region. And we saw it to some extent perhaps even in Nepal. We saw it in the Maldives. The Maldives perhaps has settled down a bit, and now suddenly Sri Lanka, where they were so desperately debt-ridden that they had to lease out the Hambantota port for 99 years. So, Skand, what exactly do you think is the motivating factor behind Sirisena actually going ahead and doing these blatantly unconstitutional acts?
Two things. One, from a larger perspective, we see there is certainly some involvement of China in our neighborhood, particularly in Maldives and Sri Lanka, where these two islands atolls were doing quite well as democracies, recent democracy in Maldives and very well established democracy in Sri Lanka. But we see that the sort of proteges of China, because China has been the most vocal supporter of former President Mahinda Rajapaksa. In fact, the Chinese ambassador was the only ambassador who called on Mahinda Rajapaksa when he was appointed illegally as the Prime Minister or unilaterally as the Prime Minister. And also in Maldives, the Amin government was defying democratic principles. So both in Maldives in the past, which has been corrected now, and in Sri Lanka at present, we see that the forces which are being supported by China are totally disrespectful of the constitutional provisions as well as of the democratic process. And that is what is worrying. And whichever government comes, whether it is Maldives, whether it is Nepal, whether it is Sri Lanka, our country's, India's stated position is that if it is a democratically elected government with due processes and with free and fair elections, then whichever is the government, India will deal with it with full respect, full regard and full honor. So one has to look at it in a wider perspective, and here I must also say that the whole world is watching, and the statements which are coming from United States, from EU, from Britain, they are quite in harmony with the statements or perceptions of India. So the countries which are truly democratic in India, around India, internationally, they are very concerned by what is happening now in Sri Lanka.
India has said that it tacitly sort of has disapproved of what happened on October the 26th, in the sense that it said that it would like to see the democratic processes come back into play. And as you rightly said, the EU, the United Kingdom, the United States, everyone has been seeking President Sirisena's, asking for him to restore the whole democratic process by calling Parliament. Now, it was apparent that that kind of pressure from major aid donors and the fact that they were not able to rustle up those numbers in Parliament was what forced President Sirisena's hand last night to actually dissolve Parliament in his second unconstitutional act. Now, at this point of time, I mean, people in Sri Lanka that one has been speaking to are so confused with what is happening and quite embarrassed by it, because there was a fairly large civil society protest that came out against this whole process. Now, what happens if the Supreme Court should say strike down what was done last evening? Or at the moment it seems to be a paralysis of governance in Sri Lanka, a country that is that vitally located for India. How do we deal with something like this?
Supreme Court would perhaps have to pronounce its judgment on this constitutional issue. After all, it is their ambit, and democracy really rests on all the pillars of the state, whether it is Parliament, President, Prime Minister, laws, media. So Supreme Court of Sri Lanka has to come up and step up and really deliver the right verdict, whatever it may be. But it certainly creates a situation of confusion and uncertainty in a country which is very vital for India's own security interests. And our country's role would be to advise restraint to all the parties. We have very good relations. President Sirisena has been here. Prime Minister Vikram Singhe was here just last month. And even with former President Mahinda Rajapaksa, the lines of communications of India are open. He had visited India a few months back and he met Prime Minister Modi and all the policymakers. So we can do business with anybody, whoever is democratically, constitutionally elected as President of Sri Lanka or Prime Minister of Sri Lanka. But we would very much wish that the forces which are behind these moves, sudden moves of President Sirisena, are not guided by China, because it seems there is some collusion of China with former President Rajapaksa and Maithripala Sirisena. Here I would like to also say that in February 2018 there were municipal elections in Sri Lanka where very surprisingly former President Rajapaksa's party got about 40% of the vote, Prime Minister Vikram Singhe's party got about 30%, and President Sirisena's party got only 12%. So since then President Sirisena may be thinking about his own political future. And very strangely, about 10-15 days back, he had alleged that there is some assassination attempt on the president, and that has also become a very murky thing in Sri Lankan politics. So the whole scenario seems to be guided by personal ambitions and personal suspicions, and we only hope that every leader acts in the best interest of Sri Lanka, people of Sri Lanka, and acts constitutional provision-wise.
It's interesting that you mentioned that particular assassination attempt and that whole very strange situation that arose, because it was apparently brought up in a cabinet meeting and then leaked by one of the cabinet members and created such a furor, in fact even involving some of India's agencies, to the extent that the President Sirisena had to call up Prime Minister Modi and explain to him that he understood completely that India was not involved in any which way. Now, it's clearly becoming apparent that the tensions between President Sirisena and Prime Minister Wickremesinghe were reaching a fairly strained point, because apparently Prime Minister Wickremesinghe didn't take this whole assassination issue very seriously, according to people in the president's camp. Now, Prime Minister Wickremesinghe visited India soon after this whole issue came up, and right after he went back was this strange situation of him losing his job. Now, it's clear that there is much more to what is happening in Colombo than meets the eye. But for a country that is struggling under tremendous economic problems, and in a country that actually world's greatest tourist destinations and has, after the end of that ethnic war of over 3 decades, is now had a positive future going for it. Why should this suddenly happen is something that's, I'm finding difficult to understand. Would you have some insights?
Yes, lots of positive things have happened in Sri Lanka. It is by and large peaceful now, and even JVP is quiet. But there is some kind of economic stagnation, and people are perhaps not very happy with the performance of the Wickremesinghe government, and that got reflected in the results of the municipal elections of February 2018. But why this could not wait? After all, the parliament session life is only for about 1 year, 1.5 years more. The president could have waited and should have allowed this parliament to continue and Prime Minister Wickremesinghe to continue. But why it became at this point so necessary for President Sirisena to first dismiss the Prime Minister, try by hook or by crook to get a majority for former President Rajapaksa, who was appointed Prime Minister, and he will continue to be the caretaker Prime Minister till the elections on 5th of January. That is also a very worrying fact, who has never faced Parliament as a Prime Minister, but he will be caretaker Prime Minister. That has been stated in some of the reports. So it all introduces a large element of instability, political instability in the country, which is not good for the development of the country and for the future of Sri Lanka. And naturally, if there is political instability in Sri Lanka, which is a very close neighbor of ours, it will have repercussions on our own security. Another very important factor is that after a long time, there was some positive movement for settling the grievances of the Tamil minority. In Sri Lanka, we have very large 8 projects. We are constructing thousands of houses there, and some kind of devolution was taking place. And all that process may come under some difficulty if Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa party manages to continue in power.
Somehow, I don't really think our projects would really lose out. I don't really think would happen.
The devolution side, the devolution of power to the Tamil.
Yes, but elections coming up in our own country, not so far away. I'm somehow slightly tempted to find linkages between the Maldives and Sri Lanka, because most of the Maldivian opposition party, the MDP and so on, all of the leadership was largely in Sri Lanka. Now, something has happened which precipitated this clearly. What it was will, of course, gradually unfold, I suppose, as time goes by, and after Monday's Supreme Court hearing, what happens will be something that we'll all be waiting to see. But finally, Skand, what ideally do you think India should do at this point of time?
I'm sure we have our lines of communication open to all the 3 major players, with former Prime Minister Wickremesinghe, acting Prime Minister, present Prime Minister Rajapaksa, as well as the President. And as we did in Maldives, again and again reiterating, advising all parties concerned to follow the Constitution and allow the democratic process to take place. In case the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka judges that the actions of President have been unconstitutional, then the former Prime Minister and the Parliament should be reinstated, and President Sirisena should accept that. And in case elections are to be held on 5th of January, then they should be held absolutely in a free, fair and open manner, so that the people of Sri Lanka are given an opportunity to decide for themselves whom they want as their Prime Minister.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Tayal.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on political developments in Sri Lanka. The participants were Skand Ranjan Tayal, former diplomat, and Nilova Roy Chaudhary, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. This program is also available on our website newsonair.nic.in.